Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Bleeding Cool Chatter. My name is Kaitlyn Booth. I am the head film writer here at Bleeding Cool, and this is our little video cast thing where I gather a bunch of my writers and make them talk about stuff on camera. Today, I am joined by
Ray Flook, I cover the TV beat for Bleeding Cool.
Bill Waters. I do television and film writing and work on special features.
Adi Tantimedh. I write the Look at Moves column whenever I get the time since I'm busy writing novels these days and dealing with film stuff.
So, we were supposed to record this yesterday, but it just didn't work out that way, and real life is a pain in the butt. But that does mean we get to talk about Star Trek Discovery today, which had its premiere last night. I just watched the first two episodes like 2 hours ago, and I'm interested to hear from your guys' perspective because I think you guys are more Star Trek fans than I am, and I'm just like a casual fan at best, so I'm curious to see how our perspectives differ on this.
I've got to own up and confess first. Kayla, I'm right along with you. I come from this as the superficial, I almost feel like I'm the Star Trek person they were trying to reach.
Yeah, me too.
Because I'm that superficial, like, I get the concepts, I like it, but I'm not going to be doing the Rosetta Stone Klingon anytime soon. So I'm coming it from more of that perspective. So I'm with you. I'm
Oh,
kind of
good.
see what others think too.
Yeah.
So you guys are actually the people that CBS are trying to attract because they can't just depend on fans. Now the interesting thing is that they reported that they had a record number of signups for that stupid CBS app because of this. But then we can talk about that later because the numbers are kind of interesting and that's worth discussing later on as well. So we should start with what did you guys think of it as people who are not familiar with Star Trek? Did you see the recent movies at least?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I love Beyond. Beyond's one of my favorite movies. I hate Star Trek Into Darkness with like passion about Thousand Suns, and I think the other one is fine. It's fine, but I really like Beyond. As a casual fan who's seen a little bit of almost all of the series, but not anything in depth, it was pretty good. It was I'm not in love with it, I don't think, but it certainly like kept my attention. I wasn't bored. I liked the cast, and I could see what they were going for. I'm still not 100% sure I know exactly what that is yet. Like, I'm not quite sure what direction this is going in because these first two episodes, and full spoilers, by the way, for the first two episodes in this thing, it's kind of a prequel almost. It's like a mini movie before we actually know what's going on. So I enjoyed it. Like I said, I'm not in love with it yet, but I'm definitely going to keep watching.
I also am a big fan of the most recent movies. Beyond, I just thought was just a ton of fun on so many levels. Like everything good about a good science fiction summer movie. The premiere, this is how I'm looking at it is as a surface Star Trek fan, I really enjoyed it. If I'm applying my 6 episode rule to any new show, already in the first episode, it dragged me in. I haven't seen the second episode, and I'm explaining to you why, because it's going to be a topic I'd like to bring up. I loved this episode for a CBS episode that I would have promoted and touted and written up through the roof. Are you asking me right now, is it a $90 show? No, it's not, because that's essentially what you're asking me to do.
Yeah.
You're with $6. You're talking essentially $6 an episode per each of the episodes that you're going to get. And Adi, I think it goes back to what you were talking about with the app. There are a lot of bigger issue question marks I have with regards to what they're doing with the show. So on CBS, I think this would have been revolutionary. To spearhead an app for streaming, no, I'm not there. I'm not there.
Yeah, it's I'm coming at this from a Star Trek fan perspective, but not a super fan. I enjoy the stuff. There's been enough movies and elements of series that I don't like that I'm kind of largely ambivalent. And after 50 years or so of Star Trek, I'm kind of Star Trek'd out to a certain extent. I mean, definitely I enjoyed Enterprise a bit in fits and starts, but by the end it's kind of like, all right, it's time to put this thing to bed for a while. Now that it's back with Discovery, speaking as someone who is a diehard, my absolute fandom, of course, is Galactica. And coming from a series that I enjoyed the first one very much, but then, the top thing is definitely the reimagined thing, so I can't really speak too much against having a show profoundly reimagined like they have this one. But again, the casual fans or people that aren't familiar with the series, right now, after 2 episodes, I think they'll have a lot more fun. I mean, almost to an extent, you don't really need to call this Star Trek. You could have slapped any old name on it and just called it good. And it's, I mean, if you take it purely as a new sci-fi series, especially hitting network, yeah, it's fine. Probably you have to apologize for it less than the average bear. But if you take it in context of the fandom that's grown up around it, and this hasn't really been touted as really a reimagining. It's kind of like a prequel thing, and they've got these... I can't even get started on the Klingon designs. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's like, you could also say that for CBS Online, and we'll talk on that more, but you mentioned it's a $90 series. It's actually also a $6 series. You wait till the very end. Actually, it's free. You just marathon the thing when it's done, and you just cancel as soon as you finish watching it. So you could, strictly speaking, watch it for free. But it's not a killer app. I mean, you're not gonna... They think they're gonna pull off something like people sign up for HBO Go so they can watch Game of Thrones. That is such a different beast. You had the built-in book fan base. You've got the people, all that word of mouth. This is mostly Star Trek fans that like it versus Star Trek fans that don't, bitching a whole lot. And that's not really going to get new folks really excited to spend $5 a week or a month.
Well, there are a whole bunch of other things at play. Like, I actually saw that the premiere of 60 Minutes last night drew in 13 million viewers. But then Star Trek itself, when 60 Minutes ended, had 8 million viewers. That means that people who watched 60 Minutes, once that was over, they saw, oh, Star Trek is on, they switched off, or they went away. So that's only 8 million people. The question is, how many of those 8 million viewers actually bothered to sign up for the app? And how many of them want to really stay on? Now, the other thing is, for a network like CBS, 8 million viewers is not a great figure, because CBS wants at least 10 million viewers, 11 million, and then 16 million is what they really want. 8 million is not a good number for any of the 3 networks. 8 million would be great if it was CW or Fox, because their best ratings are maybe 5 billion at best. So this isn't as big a success as people might think, or how they might try to spin it.
And you know what? Also, I also don't think it's almost in a lot. Well, I think what best exemplifies it. There was a moment during the first hour when it was on CBS where I'm watching Discovery, and then they go right to a commercial for NCIS. And to be honest, as a geek, it was a slap in the face, because what it was really telling me at this point was, well, for free, we're going to give you every NCIS, CIS, military old skewing program possible. But if it's something you're really interested in, you're going to have to pay us extra dollars. And that's where my biggest concern is. I want to cut cords. Now what's happening is I'm cutting cords on cable to now be forced to have to subscribe to 27 streaming signal companies to literally, like with CBS, I'm not going to get CBS All Access for just Discovery. And in all honesty, I'm not really interested in the vast majority of CBS's library. So again, like cable, where I need 10 channels but pay for 200, I'm being forced to essentially pay $6 for a streaming service for one show for 98% of a service I'm really not going to care about. And that,
how many people want to stream old episodes of NCIS? Because CBS's main demographic is old people, who are people like people who are older than us, basically. They're old people who are afraid of computers and who think that there are serial killers and murderers on every street corner. And these are old people who are not going to subscribe to an app.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like your target demographic does, like, what is their target demographic here? I mean, it's like you have 2 completely different dichotomies going on here. Like you said, you have the older people who watch NCIS, who watch all that stuff. They're turning on and watching it when it's on. They might DVR it, maybe. And then you have, like, I want to say maybe like 40 and younger who, grew up on Star Trek, and they're already subscribed to Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime. And it's like, do they really want another one when it's really not that hard to get your way around and find a dark corner of the internet to find this for free. It's like, it's a very interesting, like, I'm not sure how it's going to work. And when I heard how much this show is going to cost, it was just, I don't know how they're going to make that money back. I don't know how.
It's interesting because this whole thing about the channels is actually giving consumers what they were howling for so long, to be able to not have a bundle of channels prepackaged like they do on cable, to be able to select a la carte. Well, now they got a la carte. Now it's on a per channel basis, but now realizing that adds up. This might have even been all right if this was the second or third streaming service that you're having to sign up for. But now how many do you have? I mean, people, if you're really enjoying the cross gamut of series, you've got Amazon Prime, you've got Hulu, you've got Netflix, you've got, pick your various series, and it adds up really fast. $5 here and $6 there goes, gets going pretty well. It's also going to be interesting to see what happens after the second episode, because we're now getting further and further away from the Brian Fuller influence, who at least he was coming into it with, but at least, the Star Trek fandom very much thought it was, heart in the right place. He's a fan. Let's do this for it. And now the episodes after this, we're going to be getting into what the people that came after really did with it. And so is this a bait and switch? They gave us the 2 Fuller episodes, and now it's going to be something completely different, because we saw those episodes, or the trailer for the next episode, and it felt, okay, maybe a bit more like a regular Star Trek. You're off on a mission and go, here's an ambassador or do something. Here's a tribble. But then there's also bits of this arc Klingon story going on. I'm interested to see what episode 3 is going to be like.
All I know is I saw Alex Kurtzman's name and I went, oh, Alex Kurtzman.
Well,
the Mummy was so bad.
Well, there were actually a lot of elements in those opening 2 hours that I thought felt more like Kurtzman than Brian Fuller.
Yeah.
Which is this kind of darker, more pessimistic and cynical post 9/11 vibe, which is all about fighting a war. Whereas for those of us who remember Star Trek, who remember the original version from the 60s or Next Generation, the whole point of Star Trek is to avoid fighting a war through diplomacy and through Cold War politics, where you outsmart the people who are trying to get their own way, and then basically stop them from starting a war. Whereas with this one, what struck me was that you have the heroine immediately say, "We have to shoot them immediately." The entire first hour was basically, just shut up and start shooting the Klingons already. And it actually puts us on her side to make us want them to shoot the Klingons. Whereas throughout all of the old show, the whole point was, no, don't start shooting at the Klingons, don't start shooting at the Romulans, because that will lead to war and millions of people will die. So to me, it kind of ran counter to what Star Trek was kind of idealistically supposed to be about in the first place. And suddenly, post 9/11, it's all about, oh my God, we need to kill them before they kill us, which is weird to me. That doesn't feel like Star Trek. That's a Star Wars, not a Star Trek.
I guess it just brings up the whole, is traditional Star Trek still relevant these days? And I, as someone who hasn't gone back and done a rewatch or even watched all of the original series, I mean, if you go back and watch them as somebody who isn't a fan already, is someone like that, is someone like maybe me or Ray, who have, watched some of them and not all of them, have kind of a general idea. If we go back and rewatch all of OG or Next Generation, is that kind of show going to hold up still? How much of this is being blinded by nostalgia? Because, we all have nostalgia about this kind of stuff. You can't get rid of the rose-colored glasses when it comes to stuff that you love.
I have to be honest in that regards. I got to say, Kaitlyn, going along with what you said, it's thanks to BBC America in a lot of ways. No thanks to BBC America. The original Star Trek, I'm going to have to stick to reading articles and books about it, because it does hurt a little bit nostalgically to watch it now through older eyes. It's a little painful. But Next Generation, I have to say, again, maybe just because the rose-colored glasses are still right here, but I feel like Next Generation, the messages still hold up pretty well. I got to say, I'm hoping, keep my fingers crossed, that stays that way. But Next Generation, I think, holds, as a layman, Star Trek fan?
Well, I think Star Trek is always relevant, including Discovery, whether we like it or not, because it's almost like each era, Star Trek reflects the era that it was made in. So Next Generation was in the 90s when it was fairly prosperous and things were relatively peaceful, even because it started even before, Kosovo and Serbia happened. And I remember thinking Next Generation was kind of like 90s kind of slightly new agey California culture, like group therapy everyone talked about, which is why they have Deanna Troi, who's an empath, except that nobody really understood what the hell an empath was, because as you can tell, telepaths read minds. What the hell is an empath? You actually have to go read up to understand what an empath is. And she seems to represent to me that whole kind of let's talk it out, everyone understand each other's feelings, which is kind of admirable because everyone's trying to be sympathetic towards each other, and there's a reason why people still love Next Generation. There might be more Next Generation fans than original '60s series fans because a lot of its stuff, when it's good, was about ethical choices and about emotional understanding and anti-racism and all that stuff. And by the time you got to Deep Space Nine, things were starting to get a bit darker, but it was still very much about diplomacy. But the notion of real politics was starting to come in because they're now involved in a war that wasn't necessarily theirs, but the Federation was being drawn into this whole Cardassian war. And then Voyager, I can't remember what I thought the subtext of Voyager was. It's been a while since I thought about it. But I remember Enterprise, that the subtext of Enterprise was Bush era post 9/11 Star Trek, where it was still vaguely liberal, but sort of incredibly middle of the road and trying very hard to not be offensive, even if all kinds of crap was going on in the real world that was ramping up to whatever we've ended up with here. And now with the J.J. Abrams produced Robert Kurtzman the three movies, and Discovery was suddenly in full-on Trump era, war in the Middle East, war everywhere Star Trek. So last night, whether we like it or not, reflects that.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think the best way I heard someone describe what the Klingons are doing is like it's Klingon ISIS. It's all of the Klingons trying to come together to make a very nationalistic and us against them, and I see all that, but at the same time you have to remember that this is actually a prequel to OG. It's like, how do you lead one into the other? And it's like this, I feel like there's going to be a really weird juxtaposition when you try and watch them or even think about them side by side. Like, if anything, this doesn't feel like a prequel to any of the Star Trek that I've ever seen. This feels like a prequel to the Kelvin universe. This feels like a prequel to the J.J. Abrams stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think that actually might have been a better way to go about doing this, because right now, trying to think of how we go from what I've seen in Discovery to what I've seen from OG, those two do not come together at all.
Yeah.
The representation of the Klingons is particularly interesting and also weird and also problematic, because in OG Star Trek, the Klingons and the Romulans were basically had a slightly Orientalist slant, and they were actually representing different facets of communism. Mm-hmm. It's almost like the Klingons in OG Star Trek represented the kind of Cossack-like Russians who were communists, and then the Romulans actually represented a kind of Eastern or Chinese style communism, because they still kind of saw Chinese and Asians as sort of Orientalist, and it's inscrutable, which was why the Romulans were kind of like these chess players who were incredibly subtle in their plots against the Federation, whereas the Klingons were almost like they were Russian Cossacks and basically Mongolians and sort of vaguely veiled communists, and that was how they were presented. And they were played by white actors under slightly brownish makeup, whereas last night I was like, the Klingons were all played by black actors, and they were sort of visually coded even underneath all that latex to be dark skinned. So it was potentially problematic in that, oh my God, we have to be afraid of these dark-skinned people who are crazy isolationists, xenophobic warmongers who want to shoot at all the white people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you, Bill?
You know, the two sides of it you're talking about, it's very much Trump era, but in a couple of the speeches really on both sides, it struck me, it's like, which side is actually the Trump side and which side is the ISIS side? Because you also have the Klingons making various things about how needing to maintain purity, the racial mixing, those bloody liberals, and so which side is the good guys, again, for their message, and that's a little bit vague, where a lot of the other series have their messages. I mean, you've got the Toss episode of Eden, you've got various other, the issues of the day, same things you've got as Next Gen, especially as you have in Deep Space Nine, between racial issues and just multicultural issues. This one's kind of like trying to put it all in one big, dramatic, modern, contemporary package. And, I'll go back to saying it feels, there's like two real aspects to it. One, as a sci-fi series, it's fine. Okay, cool. I'll see what happens next, see if it hooks in and keeps on going. As a Star Trek series, it's, again, for those casual fans and the people that are not really all that invested, or maybe they like some of the JJ stuff, that's dandy and it kind of works more. But if you're trying to, like Adi commented on, no matter where they take this, aligning it with where you're going to get into with the original series is a little weird. Just even the personalities of the Klingons are so utterly not the same creatures. I kind of wish they would have just done this as a reimagination of Star Trek, set basically as, 10, 15 years before the original series time frame. Go. And just leave it at that. Or give it another same. But they needed something to be able to sell their CBS Online because none of their other properties were going to sell it.
Well, also there's the fact that, continuity is the thing to do right now. I mean, 10 years ago before the Marvel Cinematic Universe hit, if they had tried to make this show, they just would have said, it's Star Trek, we're starting over for reasons, and that's it. Done. Move on.
Yeah. New 52 it. That's it. This is New 52 Star Trek. And with all that it entails.
Ouch.
Well, yeah, and I don't know about you guys, but I characterize New 52 as complete reboot where everyone's an asshole.
Yeah. Well, and the New 52 is, my opinion of New 52 is because they were cowards. The whole idea of, the series has 400 comic issues. That's too daunting for new readers. They've been doing it for 50 years. Why, what's the difference now? But they want to be able to slap number 1 on it, give it 3 different covers, and sell it to everybody at $5 a pop.
Oh, 3 covers. Your optimism is adorable that there's only 3.
I'm trying to hedge.
You were going to say something, Ray. Go ahead.
Well, on a side note there, I love the flashback to the 90s. I miss the days of 27 lenticular die-cast covers that end up filling landfills in the Midwest where there are still X-Men number 1s rotting away. I love that. Makes my heart warm for those days. I gotta say, and listening to each of you comment, and again, as a layman fan, I'm realizing more. Discovery worked for me the longer I don't think about it. Because the one thing, even as sitting here now talking to all of you, the one thing, and Bill, you really touched upon this too, 2 things actually I really took out of the premiere was, 1, I didn't get that sense of Star Trek hope in any way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. It felt like it was just this constant building of inevitable dread. And also, and again, Bill, you hit it. I didn't buy Starfleet as the good guys. I'm not saying the Klingons were like, they're the big bad, but there wasn't anything in the standoffs that I saw that made me think, well, I have to be righteously on the side of Starfleet. And that, to me, I know they're going for a different tone and going for a different vibe. It took me out of it, and it made me wonder, okay, for those people who are diehard Star Trek fans, they have to be having some serious issues right now.
Actually, let's talk just for a second the space battles, because it just came to mind. When the fighting starts to fight, the special effects and the sound effects that they use in that, pew, 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 pew. And that's what the effects sound like when the ships are firing their phasers. Pew, 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 pew. And I'm like, this is horrible. It's like the effects were so bad in that particular moment, and just it kind of hurt me a little bit. I mean, when some of the 60s effects are better than what you got in the new one, it's issues.
They spent a ton of money on this, and the special effects are not going to cost any more or less no matter what kind of sound they came up with, and then they with pew pew pew. But let's talk about the representation of the Federation, because the Federation has always represented America, essentially, and America as world policemen, because in original Star Trek, the Federation was essentially Kennedy-era America. And Star Trek Discovery essentially was portraying the Federation as completely ineffectual, because they're faced with a whole bunch of Klingons who are extremely hostile. You have Michael Burnham, who's basically saying, they're going to attack us, and yet the Federation is still kind of going, well, let's talk it out. And she's trying to scream, they're going to attack us. And then they still say, no, let's try to talk it out. And then the Klingons start blowing them away. So that's a kind of weird straw man setup of the Federation as this kind of wishy-washy, complacent sort of liberal organization that's totally unprepared for war, which is a strange sort of commentary when considering, you know, America has been incredibly hawkish when it comes to war ever since 9/11, which is 17 years ago, about 17 years ago by now.
You know,
so that's a strange piece of representation to me.
That actually brings up an interesting note when you're talking about how the Federation kind of comes into this. Rolling it back, thinking of original series, there's the first episodes, and I'm not one that has them all memorized by title, but where the Romulans are first encountered. I'm totally
fake geek boy.
I'm a totally fake geek boy. When they first encountered the Romulans, and oh my word, they look just like Vulcans, and you know everyone looks at Spock sideways. But the Federation harkens back to his earlier encounters with Romulans and knows that they're a hostile thing, and so they go in with shields up, you know, armed torpedoes, and okay, now let's talk. And they did that back in the 60s. Now we're coming in with the thing that they've had last encounters a century ago was a hostile encounter with the Klingons, and now we're all coming in with, hey, let's talk. I don't know.
Could they be kind of trying this for some reason when you guys were talking about representation and how the Federation's being portrayed and everything, could they be trying to do kind of what they did in Rogue One with the Empire and the Alliance in showing that there are some, I don't want to say good, but some moral gray areas on both sides of the conflict? Could they be trying to approach it from almost a centrist point of view? Because that seems to be a really popular thing with people now, is, you know, trying to meet everybody in the middle, even when you're trying to meet, you know, essentially space ISIS in the middle. Do you think that could be something they're trying to go for?
Maybe. What do you guys think?
It is a tendency amongst a lot of screenwriters, especially Hollywood screenwriters, which also goes into a sense of equivalency, because I notice a lot of American screenwriters and also video game storytellers, by the way, and it's an American thing to have an equivalency to say, oh, both sides are equally at fault, both sides are equally bad. And that's actually rubbish, because
of course,
like this, you have stories like this deal with moral absolutes in genre. There's always one side that is bad, unambiguously bad, and in this case, it's the Klingons in Star Trek Discovery. And then if anything, the Federation side was portrayed as a kind of wishy-washy centrist. Even the interesting thing that I noticed, which is that Michelle Yeoh's ship was the Shenzhou, and Shenzhou is the name of a Chinese painter from the Ming Dynasty, which means that you have a Federation ship that's named after an artist, not a general or military man or philosopher. And it means something when you have this metaphor where a ship named after an artist is blown out of the sky. So again, that becomes a metaphor for the how ineffectual trying to be let's talk it out man is, which again goes against the basic ideals of Star Trek, as Gene Roddenberry set it up, which is that, look, let's solve the problem by talking it over because we do not want to go to war. Whereas the whole point of Star Trek Discovery is let's go to war so that we have a whole series about going to war.
Yeah, because we don't have enough of that in our science fiction.
Yeah, there's an area in narratives to take someone that's again, someone's morally ambiguous, you're rogue, you're pirate, you're criminal, and have a redemption story or something finding their way. But to Adi, to your point, it's this ain't that. This is kind of like being able to portray being inconsistent with what you're trying to render here. Who's going to be the good guy? I was really waiting for the Federation to end up doing some sort of cheap shot. Because given how the whole story laid out, it wouldn't have surprised me in the least.
I mean, in the old Trek, I mean, in the original 60 series, and I don't remember it so much in Next Generation, but there was always a storyline of some hawkish Starfleet captain who actually wants to go to war.
Right.
That was the whole point of Star Trek Darkness, wasn't it? There was the guy who wanted to go to war.
Yep.
Yeah, and Star Trek Darkness was also a 9/11 truther subtext, which is kind of interesting.
That movie's so bad.
Particularly telling that you guys liked Star Trek Beyond, because Simon Pegg was hired to rewrite the script, and he consciously wanted to make it as much like original Star Trek as possible, and that was what everyone liked about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
For me, the best one bringing Star Trek to a new generation was absolutely Star Trek 09. Was it a great Star Trek story? Not particularly, but for a way to graciously do here's an alternate timeline for a series, because there's even that whole scene in it where they talk about how your original series your original timeline is just fine. We're just in a new one. So people that are purists, they're actually saying that yours is completely intact. This one is just a new one, and plus it was just fun. It had the great soundtrack. Like you guys, the more I even today think about Into Darkness, the more I get angry, and want to beat it to death with a rock. If we could just excise it from the entire thing. I mean, Star Trek really never really had its Christmas special. This is kind of it, just with more hatred.
Star Trek Into Darkness is the Star Wars Christmas special of the Kelvin universe.
Totally is.
That's a headline right there.
That's the pull quote from this tonight.
It's the pull quote from this.
But then the most recent movie, you know what? Yeah, I'll agree with you guys. I mean, I didn't love it, but for myself, I enjoyed it. I enjoy it. You've always got J.J. Verse has a problem with how big he makes his ships, and just other kind of technical issues. But it was a lot of fun, and so there was definitely that. But it felt like, okay, now where are you going to go from here? And going into a series, I would have liked to have seen a series feeling more like that, or extending off of that. Beyond, that would have been kind of more fun than going back to this Into Darkness thing. Because again, if you had gone forward, you don't have to figure out how to tie it back into a timeline. Here you've got something where you need to figure out some way to stitch it back into something going into either original series or to JJ verse.
Yeah.
What I'm curious about is at what point does CBS do a pseudo version of Fox and Gotham and go, oh well, suddenly now we're just going to do our own timeline, so we're not going to be quite... I'm very curious when they're going to pull that report.
How about by the time they renew for season 2?
If they renew for season 2.
Yeah. I think they've got almost too much vested in this, because either some CBS executives are going to leave by being fired, and then they'll get rid of the show, or they'll renew this thing. Because they just put so much street cred onto this.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what we've been hearing is that CBS would like to have a show, and especially whatever's on that streaming service, to be like a big cultural talking point for everyone to be talking about it on the internet, on social media, and on news sites. And you're not really going to get it if not many people get to see it, because it's locked behind the streaming site. They tried to do it with Good Fight, and nobody talked about Good Fight. And I saw some of Good Fight, and it's actually a really good show. It's as good as The Good Wife, and in many ways it's darker and it's more complex than The Good Wife because of the issues they were tackling. But nobody talked about it because nobody bothered to subscribe to that streaming app. In fact, somebody told me today that CBS All Access streaming app is actually 3 years old. I didn't even know about that. I thought they launched it with The Good Fight. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, and I think another problem I think they're going to have moving forward, not to turn this into let's just pee all over the CBS All Access map, but in all honesty, even now the creators of Star Trek Discovery are saying that it wouldn't be until most likely sometime in 2019 before they'd get a second season. If you're building an app on a show that you're basically now already looking to say, well, once we burn off these 15, it's going to be a little over a year. What do you have ready to take its place to keep selling that app? I haven't heard anything.
I haven't either.
The Good Fight. 2018, after Star Trek Discovery ends, wait a few months, and then season 2 of The Good Fight will come along. And then they'll hope that people will remember to come back for season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, assuming that everyone hasn't ended up hating Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah, I think... sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was just looking at how long we've been talking, and I was right about how long this conversation was going to get. I was thinking maybe we could do a little bit of compare and contrast of the other show that is on right now that is very similar to Star Trek, and that's the Orville.
I love Galaxy Quest.
Which you guys have seen. I've only seen like the first 5 minutes of the pilot. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm going to let you guys go to town and sell the Orville to someone who hasn't watched it yet. That's what your idea is. Someone who has now seen Star Trek Discovery that hasn't watched the Orville. Why should I watch the Orville?
It's basically Seth MacFarlane's fanfic version of Next Generation with all the serial numbers shaved off and with a lot more frat boy jokes.
Okay.
I could sell you on it by telling you what it's not. Don't go into it thinking that it's some kind of scary movie type cheap satire of science fiction shows. It's done lovingly, very, very lovingly by Seth MacFarlane.
Yeah,
It even contains a lot of the problems of the original series.
Yeah.
Like last week's episode did something really bad that the second episode of The Next Generation did way back then, which was to actually have this entire patriarchal, misogynistic alien species played entirely by black actors. And I can't believe nobody thought that might be a problem.
That's a good point, yeah.
My biggest... I've really enjoying Orville. It's kind of funny. It's all this is. Be careful what you wish for, because in the case of CBS Online being a streaming service, people have for actually decades now been screaming they don't want to get wrapped into the prepackaged collections of channels. They want to pick their own and then order those. Great, now they've got it. Orville is the epitome of you want classic Star Trek. Orville is classic Star Trek episodes. It's got the vibe. It's got the slightly cheese. It's got the they do have they try to go into some more serious topical issues. As showrunners and Seth have all said, it's not meant to be a spoof. It's not a farce. It's just taking the spirit of someone who loved the vibe and the idea of the original Star Trek and make a series of it. Is it successful? That's kind of up to the individual viewer. But I think in going after that as your target, that they've pretty much accomplished. I think kind of one of the biggest challenges is some people just don't like him with Seth. They have problems with him either as a comedian, his deliveries, or his lines, which, he is one of those actors for me that kind of, when I see him, I'm just seeing Seth MacFarlane. No matter what he's doing, it's him. Yeah. It's like whenever you see, Matrix boy, what's his name?
Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, Keanu Reeves. No matter what I ever see him in, I'm seeing Keanu Reeves. I'm never going to see...
The same way with Johnny Depp.
Yeah. I mean, you see him.
Yeah.
That's my problem with Batfleck. I will never see not, Ben Affleck. Will always be him in a Batman suit. And, for me, that just takes me out of it a bit. And so that's kind of like almost the biggest downfall. I think he's trying really hard, but I think that's just kind of a blocker for some. But I like Orville. I think it will do better for Fox as long as Fox doesn't pull a Firefly and shoot it in 4 episodes and scramble the order.
How have the ratings been?
Last one I saw it was still holding solid. Not as much as the first one, but the last 2 have been doing pretty well. I will pull that up while we're looking.
Well, the first one had football to lead into it, so it had more than rating. Yeah. But it's dropped by about at least 30%, possibly 40%, and it's probably going to maintain that number, because the people who like it will keep on watching it. But the interesting thing about the Orville is, like Bill says, it's not a spoof, and it's not necessarily a farce. It's not a joke. It's actually earnestly trying to do Trek style space opera, but it's also satirical. It has satirical commentary in it in ways that Trek doesn't have. Like, was it the second episode where they have this advanced alien species that feels so superior to everyone else that they'll collect other alien species and keep them in zoos, for example. And that whole hour was just leading up to the punchline at the very end, which is that the Orville crew, they rescue all the captain and all the alien species from the zoo by giving them reality television recordings from the Earth in the 21st century. And the alien species is just so horrified and fascinated by the grotesquerie of American reality television that they become hooked on it in their zoo, because they're just playing these actual reality shows from Fox, for example, from the 21st century. So, Trek could never do that, and Trek would never do that, for example. So, as a piece of satire, that kind of worked. It worked, and Seth MacFarlane and his writers actually spent a whole hour of all that looking like Trek, but just to set up that punchline. I thought that was interesting. That was at least creative. And then you got last week's episode, which was this incredibly weird, problematic representation, because it's about the crew member who's basically from this single gender species, all played by black actors. That's entirely male and patriarchal and misogynistic. They think women are superior. They hate women. And he and his partner have a baby, and the baby is female. And they're both horrified. They're like, oh my God, okay, we have to take it back home and have it have surgery so that it becomes female. And it becomes this weird metaphor for a whole bunch of things. It could be a metaphor for female genital circumcision. It's a metaphor for forced gender reassignment, which is really weird. And it just did it. And the weirdest thing is that, why didn't anyone in the writers' room talk about this and say, maybe we should not do this. This is not the right type of metaphor to play around with, because we haven't even decided which metaphor it is. And the weirdest thing is that executive producer and the director of that episode was Brannon Braga, who was one of the writers of Next Generation and one of the showrunners of Voyager, and he was one of the co-showrunners of Star Trek Voyager, and he's on the staff of the Orville now. So that at least shows the intent of how serious Seth MacFarlane is to have his own Trek show without calling it Trek.
The sad part that Seth MacFarlane's always going to have to deal with, though, is the fact that there's always going to be that percentage that sees Seth MacFarlane as Family Guy is toilet humor, and toilet humor is dumb. And there's just this percentage that always will not see that Seth MacFarlane is brilliant. The music he writes for the musical numbers just for Family Guy alone, just his musical knowledge is amazing. And, you touched upon it before, this idea of trying to be a real science fiction show but have satire in it. That's not an easy needle to thread, and not a lot of creators would even have the clout to be able to attempt it. And like I said, so far I've liked what I've seen. I really have. Again, you're right. It's painful in its certain spots where they didn't realize, but again, I like that he never comes across like he's going for the cheap moment or the cheap laugh. And it's funny when you talk about the build up to the punchline. I've always felt that's about 90% of Family Guy, where you get 21 minutes of build up to that 1 minute of punchline, and it's the willingness to say, look, this is either going to work or it's not, but I'm going to try, I'm going to give it to you, and hopefully at the end of it, you're hooked in the way I wanted you to be hooked in. And so far, I think it's working. I'll be curious to see where it goes.
You're talking about, I was just looking at the ratings numbers, so it beat out the Emmys.
That's not saying much.
No, it's true, but it ended up doing beat everything else that time slot except for Big Bang Theory, silly people still watch that. And then it's still holding up relative to what else is on that evening. So it's had a 4 million viewers during its most recent time slot, and it's picking up more than a half a point in the plus 3 days reviewing period. Not that Nielsen has any clue how to actually do proper ratings yet, but one day they'll figure their shit out. Yeah, they don't know what they're doing. They still think it's fascinating that people actually DVR their shows. You spoke about the theme of this last episode with the gender reassignment surgery. Yeah, I didn't think it was much of a metaphor. I thought it was pretty much straight up what they were going with regards to whether it be genital mutilation or the other sort of themes, but it goes right back to what original series would have done. They had the episode of was it Let That Be Your Last Battlefield with the aliens that are half black and half white, and the other ones are the reverse, and doing those sort of social commentaries of the era. This isn't any great leap off of that. So they're trying to follow in those footsteps. Now, again, whether or not that they're actually, doing it successfully or not is a totally legitimate, is this working? It's just like the comedy in that first episode, which, Seth, I think there was a couple of pieces of humor that went a little bit too much towards his base rather than being a little bit more elegant than I think Star Trek would have tried to go for. But they're trying, and it'll be interesting to find out, do they tune it in to the right combination for their audience before, viewership degrades? So.
Would you say if you've seen it, would you give it the 6-episode rule? Would
absolutely.
You say that
I'd watch it
going through to see if it improves by the 6th episode?
Yeah. I'll keep on watching it through. I totally would. It's one, again, it's a series where I could tell someone to have to work it, and anybody who goes, there is not a Star Trek Next Gen fan alive that does not accept in their heart that if they tell a friend to watch Star Trek Next Gen, here, you can watch this series, that they know that they're going to have to sit there and go, no, you just got to power through that first season. Because every person is ashamed of some of those episodes because they're horrid. Granted, later on, you get some really amazing episodes of Next Gen, but that first season is crap. So, taking it in the classic Star Trek flavor, some episodes will work, some won't. Hopefully, they use it to dial in.
If we ever do a Bleeding Cool chatter about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I'll do some apologizing for about the first season of that also. That's a little painful.
I love that series, that and Angel, and I'll watch. And I'm sorry, I'll watch Once More with Feeling anytime it's on.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely.
But the Star Wars fans are currently trying to get me, or at least my friends who are Star Wars fans, who are like, you need to watch Clone Wars. I was like, I tried. That first season is not good, and I'm not liking it. They're like, well, just skip it. I'm like, no, I'm not skipping it. I'm either going to watch it or I'm going to not. You can't make me watch something I don't want to, though. All right, you guys have anything else you want to add about Orville or Star Trek?
No, I look forward to seeing what we got next week on both.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not even necessarily a fan of Star Trek. I just find science fiction interesting because all of science fiction is always metaphor and always a symbol, and so you try to read that, try to read what kind of subtext they are, and it's never boring. I mean, I almost wish we could have a broader discussion about the space opera on TV, like with the other sci-fi shows like. Well, Battlestar Galactica, we could talk to death on that one, but we could also talk about Dark Matter or even Killjoys, which are interesting because they're very Canadian in certain respects. And have you guys seen Blake 7?
Yeah.
BBC. Yeah, because that's probably the darkest and most pessimistic space opera out there, and it's where what's called the Federation are the fascist bad guys and the fascist regime. And when I was watching Dark Matter, which is unfortunately now cancelled, I started thinking, hey, this is kind of like the Canadian Blake 7 in many ways, because the politics are interesting. The politics are such that they have to navigate the fact that wherever they go, the people they deal with might just stab them in the back at the drop of a hat. And that also kind of applies to Farscape. And Farscape was a great series because Farscape has so many other interesting subtexts. My favorite subtext about Farscape is if you read it as an allegory for this hapless American dude who's trapped in the Australian BDSM scene where everyone there wants.
That actually works.
I think we have the second pull line for the night, so we now have 2 to choose from.
Excellent. And with that, thank you everybody for joining us this evening.